let's get right into this then, Pepe, because you have been writing a whole bunch. And before we get started, everyone, make sure you're liking this video. Make sure you're subscribing to the channel, of course. Be sure as well to support independent media by us on Patreon. You can also find all kinds of links in the description. Send a super chat, all of that good stuff. But let's talk about what you've been writing about, Pepe, because I took special interest in your most recent article in The Cradle talking about the end of the G20 and the rise of BRICS Plus.
Right.
So could you talk about maybe the rise of BRICS Plus? Because we've had a lot of conversation. We've even had Saudi Arabia, right, being kind of open to the idea of joining.
They're dying to get in.
Yeah.
They're desperate to get in fact.
So there's a lot going on with BRICS. I mean, I remember not too long ago, right, 5-7 years ago, where BRICS was not so much a headline story. It was kind of a newer development. Now it feels like with the Ukraine crisis, things have accelerated a lot. You have Iran, you have Algeria, Argentina. A lot of these countries are submitting their applications, and both Russia, China, and the BRICS countries are saying, well, we're going to figure out how to incorporate.
It's a very complex process. Yeah.
So can you talk about this process? Why is this happening? Why are more countries joining BRICS or wanting to join BRICS at this time?
Well, I'll try to make it very short, because we would have to start, in fact, in the 2000s when BRICS was started, and especially when BRICS, BRIC, the original BRIC, the original four, became BRICS with the incorporation of South Africa. And it took a long time to solidify this alliance of four countries in different continents and establish a long-term plan. And this is something that is coming to fruition these past few years, and especially this year, and especially after this the special military operation in Ukraine. Because as everybody knows, everybody with a working brain knows, the global South did not follow the collective West, or at least NATO-stan, as I call them, in their fury against Russia, which was a mix of anger, Russophobia, and absolutely misguided policies, anything you can imagine. South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, what we call the Middle East, most of them were either impartial or in the background, of course, they were more or less not endorsing 100% what Russia was doing, but understanding Russian motives. And the merit of all that is Russian diplomacy. As we all know, Russia has probably the number one diplomatic team in the world. It's absolutely unbeaten. Nobody can compete with them in terms of the breadth, the depth of knowledge, the fact that they are real diplomats. They are very skilled in even convincing adversaries on their merits, on intellectual merits always. And this is very, very important. The fact that now we have a conjunction of an institutional conjunction of several organizations that are merging more or less and getting their act together for the first time since the beginning of the millennium, in fact. So we have BRICS, of course, and the development of what we call BRICS Plus, which is a concept. As a concept, this came from Russia a few years ago. It started to be debated inside Russia at the highest levels, a level of Valdai Club, for instance, the best Russian think tank, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Chinese always love the idea because they see BRICS Plus as an expansion towards the global South. The problem was always how to get India on it, on the bandwagon. And once again, Russia diplomacy, of course, because don't forget that the original nexus of BRIC was RIC was RIC, Russia, India, China. And then that evolved into BRIC and then BRICS. So once again, what the Russian diplomats were doing was trying to bridge the gaps, and there are many gaps between Beijing and Delhi, and they succeeded. And now Modi and the party, the BJP, are fully behind a very strong BRICS and in favor of expansion of BRICS as well. So now we have BRICS, we have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, we have the Eurasian Economic Union, we have the institutional financial arrangements like Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the BRICS New Development Bank, NDB, which is the BRICS answer to the World Bank. And of course, the Russian concept of Greater Eurasia Partnership. This is the official Russian concept, which runs in parallel to the Chinese Belt and Road. Of course, the breadth of the Chinese Belt and Road, especially because they started earlier. They started 9 years ago, first in Kazakhstan and then in Indonesia, in Jakarta. And it's practically now BRI is practically a global project. And Russia, basically, their idea is the idea that they have even before the Chinese. Let's build a free market between Lisbon and Vladivostok. The Russians were already talking about this in the 2000s. Like, BRI came in 2013. So the Chinese obviously were paying attention. What they have is what Russia doesn't have. They have the financial muscle to implement a project of trade and connectivity across Eurasia, different parts of Eurasia, all the way to Europe, and also including Africa and parts of Latin America as well. That's what BRI is. And it's not an accident that after COVID, Xi Jinping a few days ago said, next year, we're going to have another Belt and Road Forum, which was canceled during the pandemic. So from now on, the Chinese are already thinking the next year we're going to have even more countries interested in BRICS, and the countries that are partners, which are over 130, plus a lot of organizations as well. Okay, let's start new projects as well. Finish the ones that are on the road. For instance, they are going to finish a very, very important BRI project, which is the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway, which is extremely important. It's the first high-speed rail in Indonesia. Indonesia is an enormous archipelago country. This is the first one of many in the future, built by the Chinese with Chinese know-how. The trains are coming from China. And Xi Jinping and President Jokowi last week, they went for a test run, which was very successful, and it's going to be inaugurated next year. So this is only one example of things are going to start to pick up again. So we have all these organizations thinking in unison, and very, very important. This is the subtract of the whole thing, the financial angle, which is now BRICS, SCO, Eurasian Economic Union. They are all thinking in terms of let's get a new currency on the market. We need to bypass the US dollar. We need a currency that is based in commodities, and we all have commodities, most of us, and gold, or maybe gold and commodities. Of course, this is a long-term process, but the train has already left the station, And one of the very few in the world that is tracking it in detail is Professor Michael Hudson. He's been writing brilliant stuff about that for almost a year now. And there are very few, in the US, there are very few that are keeping up with what Michael is doing, in fact. And you see Chinese economists, of course, writing about it, Russian economists, Iranian economists, and the fact that they are getting to Pakistani, the fact that they are getting together and discussing it together inside these different forums. There's a discussion inside BRICS, there's a discussion inside the SCO, there's another one inside the Eurasian Economic Union. So sooner or later, And sooner would be maybe starting next year all the way to 2024. They have to start getting these teams together. And then I said, look, we need a unifying approach, and we need to find a single currency for all our members. And that would include the SCO members, countries like Turkey, which is an observer at the SCO but want to get in, the BRICS, as you mentioned in the beginning, which has now already a gigantic list of people who want to get in, not only the ones that we already know, like Algeria, Argentina, and Iran. They all applied officially.
Right.
But, Indonesia, they applied in Bali last week during the G20. Thailand, they applied late last week in Bangkok during APEC. So every week or months you have new countries, and there's an enormous list that includes a lot of African countries. Kazakhstan in Central Asia, which is a key country because Kazakhstan already belongs to the Belt and Road and to the Eurasia Economic Union. And a list of South Americans as well, an enormous South American list. Everybody wants it because would be, in terms of integrating their economies with Brazil as well. And with Brazil and Argentina, the big South American heavyweights, they have even more opportunities of having, for instance, Russia, India, China investing even more in their own nations as well. So it's a convergence of interests, and it happens to be in 2022. I'm putting a very long story short, Danny.
Yeah, and it comes amid the Ukraine situation, which is ongoing. And you just published an article about this, and I'd like to get your opinion on the relationship, because it seems like a lot of this has sped up quite dramatically. And the G20, and you wrote about the G20, it seemed to be almost like this forum where this phenomena, this development of all of these countries, you call it the global South effect. You talk about China and Russia kind of moving with a lot of the world by their side away from this model of unipolarity. And so, you wrote an article in Strategic Culture called Electric War, just published today. I'll pull it up. But could you talk about the relationship between this war and this really what it seems to be a rapidly intensifying development of integration of the global South? Like, what's the connection here?
Well, the global South has been examining and analyzing what's happening between Russia and NATO, not Russia and Ukraine, very carefully. The main players, apart from Russia and China, Iran, Pakistan, India, Turkey, the key South American players, apart from Brazil, the key African players, everyone in West Asia, everyone in the Persian Gulf, starting with Saudi Arabia, which wants to become a BRICS member. They already applied. And what do they see? They do understand that this is a sort of existential clash, as it is. They understand that if by unforeseen reasons Russia would collapse in this fight against NATO, not against Ukraine, but let's suppose that NATO wins. we don't know how, because they don't have the manpower, they don't have the troops, they don't have enough technology, they are not going to invade Russia. But okay, let's assume that Russia for some reason folds and loses, and NATO gets what they wanted from the beginning, which is to turn Ukraine into a rabid anti-Russia base with missiles deployed all over pointing against Russia. Let's suppose that would happen. The next step would be China doing the same thing against China, using Taiwan as they are using Ukraine as a pawn in their game, to quote Dylan once again. So this is something that if you discuss this with the intellectual elites in Lebanon, in Tehran, in Islamabad, or in Buenos Aires, they understand this. For them, it's crystal clear. Like, it's like Russia is a sort of Putin used in one of his speeches. He never uses the term revolutionary. He said, and I'm quoting him, directly, the situation in many respects is revolutionary. And it is, because now you have a sort of a revolutionary vanguard. Of course, we can discuss this for ages, but basically the vanguard in terms of fighting the collective West, absolutely by themselves. The Russians are not getting help from anybody. They're fighting the whole NATO machinery, which is embedded and embodied by the Ukrainian army, which is not the Ukrainian army anymore. This is a NATO army, essentially, with the best of the best and the best intelligence that they have. And Russia is fighting them, straight away, straight to the point. And they know that the next step would be something that already started in terms of cultural war and in terms of a demonization campaign, a xenophobic campaign, which came after the Iranophobic campaign of the early 2000s and the Russophobic campaign, which is ongoing. So they can understand this very, very well. So they know that what does the West propose? Nothing. The West is indebted. It's fearful. In terms of the American empire, we have a hugely indebted empire that may be starting to see that the free lunch is over. The 75-year-old free lunch is no more. And what do they see on the Eurasian side? Not only Russia, but very, very important, the solidification of the strategic partnerships between Russia, China, and Iran. Now, these three, they have interlocking strategic partnerships. And if we add India, we have a strategic partnership between India and Iran and a strategic partnership between Russia and India as well. So these are the four main players in Eurasia. Turkey would like to be the fifth. But the problem is they're still hedging their bets. And this is something that we could discuss also for hours, how Erdogan is hedging his bets all the time. But if he's elected, if he's re-elected next year, this is going to change drastically, because then he's going to see, okay, now that I'm re-elected, I can do whatever I want. I'm going to catch the Eurasia train, because this is the future. I'm not gonna be a sub-NATO member forever and a no European Union member, and I don't want to get into the European Union. For what?